was Friday, the 23rd of December. The world was planning annual holidays and looking to bid farewell to a not-so-good year, marked by disease, war, and an economic slowdown. And of course, hoping for a better year ahead. Chanda and Deepak Kochhar had even greater festivities to look forward to. Their son's wedding coming up in January. They had planned an ultra-lavish affair over 3 days in 2 luxurious properties surrounded by the sand dunes of Jaisalmer. And why not? This was the family wedding of Chanda Kochhar, former head of ICICI and once one of India's most celebrated bankers. But nothing could have prepared the Kochhars for what followed. That very day, Chanda and Deepak Kochhar were arrested by the CBI. The agency accused them of fraudulent grant of loans worth 3,250 crore rupees to companies associated with bankrupt electronic appliances maker Videocon. On Monday, the CBI also arrested Videocon chairman Venugopal Dhoot. Mrs. Kochhar, a recipient of the Padma Bhushan, is now in Baikala Women's Prison. Her husband and Dhoot in Arthur Road Jail, Mumbai. The arrest is a sudden development in a twisted case that has pickled for the last 3 years and has been dormant for a year. The arrest also is the latest chapter in the story of Chanda Kochhar, perhaps unparalleled in her steep rise and fall, from celebrity banker, woman icon, and recipient of one of India's most prestigious civilian awards to a fraud accused, bereft of all her power and position, a prisoner. It's an intriguing story, with a constantly thickening plot, many twists, open ends, and unanswered questions. What led to the sudden arrest in a case almost everyone had given up on? Why was there a lull in the probe at all? What is the case against the Kochhars and what's their likely defense? Will the CBI go after other bankers and other companies linked to the case? And what does such a staggering incident mean for the banking industry? All this and more in our first episode this year. It's the 5th of January. I'm your host Anirban Chowdhury, and you're listening to the Chanda Kochhar Chronicles on the Morning Brief.
Chanda never interacted much with media. So whatever we know of her is from people who worked with her, and people say she was very hardworking.
That was Sangita Mehta, my colleague, ET's banking ace.
One thing about Chanda was that she was very good with numbers. She could kind of, count 2 numbers at the same time. She was very good at assessing a project. She was very good at picking holes in a project. So those things kind of, was a differentiating thing. And then she had exposure all across. At a very young age, she was heading infrastructure team. She was heading retail team. She had exposure in corporate lending. So those things also kind of, added to her experience, and then she could leverage that. But more importantly, she could deliver what the bosses wanted, which is an excellent quality, It just keeps her peers always at their toes because she's kind of way ahead in terms of, productivity. I mean, usually bankers describe her as a loner, that she would keep to herself, do her work, and office to work, work to office kind of person.
A gold medalist in management studies, Chanda Kochhar was an overachiever. She joined ICICI as a management trainee in 1984. It was a fiercely competitive place, and a place where woman power thrived. Chanda Kochhar was one of several outperforming women executives of ICICI that really broke the glass ceiling of banking. Some of them are Lalita Gupte, who later became ICICI's joint managing director, Renuka Ramnath, who headed its venture capital arm, Shikha Sharma, subsequently chief of Axis Bank, and Kalpana Morparia, who later headed JP Morgan's Indian arm. But at ICICI, Ms. Kochhar outshone all her colleagues, women and men.
So for Chanda, it was quite a meteoric rise. Within 8 to 10 years, she became a manager, and that was a big thing in ICICI. And then at the age of 45, she became deputy managing director. So that, I think, was a very defining moment for Chanda, because that was a clear sign of where she's heading. And then in 2009, she was the CEO of ICICI. At that time, it was the largest private bank.
Her earliest colleagues remember a young, handsome man who came to meet Chanda Kochhar most evenings. One colleague even described him as handsome enough to be a Bollywood star. That was Deepak Kochhar, her classmate at management school and later her husband. Now, not much is documented about Kochhar except that he also went to Harvard and his business venture in renewable energy, which is where our main story starts. A year prior to Chanda Kochhar becoming CEO of ICICI, in 2008, her husband Deepak Kochhar got together with Venugopal Dhoot to set up a renewable power company. Now, Dhoot had built the massively successful Videocon. Among other things, the first Indian company to get a license to make color TVs in the country. But later, Dhoot faced tough competition in the sector and tried his hand at other businesses, like oil and gas and telecom. Most of these businesses failed. His venture with Deepak Kochhar actually was one such example. The company was called New Power. Shareholders in the company included Dhoot, his two brothers, Mahesh Pugalia, a former employee of Videocon, Deepak Kochhar, another Videocon employee, and Pacific Capital Services Private Limited, an investment company founded by Deepak Kochhar's parents, and Supreme Energy, a company owned by the Dhoots.
So in March 2010, Supreme Energy gave 64 crore loan to New Power Renewables. And then in 7 months, sometime in November 2010, Dhoot transferred his stake in Supreme Energy to an associate named Mahesh Pugalia. Thereafter, sometime between September 2012 and April 2013, Pugalia transferred his stake in Supreme Energy to Pinnacle Energy. Pinnacle Energy is basically a trust which was run by Deepak Kochhar. He was a managing trustee there. And then in subsequent years, Pinnacle absorbed New Power within itself. So then there was New Power Energy, which was the beneficiary of the 64 crore loan that they received from Dhoot. And thus, New Power ceased to exist. The money resides in the books of Pinnacle Energy. And we can clearly see that within 3 years, how loan has moved from the books of Dhoot through different entities into a trustee company owned by Deepak Kochhar.
But that is just a commercial transaction, right? No, because simultaneously,
that is when this transaction happened between Dhoot and Deepak Kochhar. It was from the time December 2008 to April 2013. That span, ICICI sanctioned a loan of 1,875 crore to 6 companies of Videocon. And Chanda was part of each and every committee. This is done by different committees that sanctioned the loan. And she was also the CEO of the bank. So the issue is that why didn't she disclose this? That her husband has a joint venture with Dhoot promoted company, that there is a relationship over there. She could have made those disclosures, but those disclosures were not made. If she did not want to make the disclosure, she could have recused herself from the committee. She did not do that.
At that time, one man was watching all this very closely. Arvind Gupta had been an investor in Videocon for 25 years. He was also an investor in ICICI and an investor activist. New Power and its associations made him very curious.
Interestingly, when I found that the promoters of this company were Mr. Venugopal Dhoot and his company and his family and Mr. Kochhar. Now, when Mr. Dhoot started investing in that company via one of his own 100% owned company, which was Supreme Energy, that the money went over there and the money came from a shareholders company called Videocon, then I think it raises the eyebrow. So that company lent some advances to New Power, and thereafter the whole transaction trail started, and the transfer of money, transfer of ownership, transfer of company's interest. It went on, and when I found that it looks like a full-blown cancer in the corporate transactions, so I had to raise, because it was the public money, it was the shareholders' money, and something that was happening in the sector wasn't a transparent banking.
Arvind Gupta blew the whistle on the Kochhars and Dhoots in 2016. In a letter addressed, among other entities, to the Prime Minister's office, he raised questions about the financial links between Deepak Kochhar and Dhoot and Chanda Kochhar's role in giving loans to the Videocon group. It was a pretty damning letter. But what were the consequences of it? In the first 2 years, nothing.
So see, how it happened is that Arvind Gupta initially raised this issue with a lot of people. He approached several investigative agencies, media houses, and people didn't take a notice of it because, it's Chanda. And then, what happened is in December 2017, a preliminary inquiry was filed by CBI on sanctioning of loan. And this news came out in March 2018 by Indian Express. They were the first ones to break the story. That CBI is looking into it. Now, that was the turning point when people started saying that, oh, there is something, because CBI doesn't file a preliminary inquiry unless there is something which is that they are seriously looking into. When Indian Express broke the news on March 28th, the very next day they issued a denial saying, this is complete rubbish. We totally support her. There is no quid pro quo. That was on 29th. On 30th, the chairman of ICICI Bank, that is M.K. Sharma, he had an unscheduled media interaction where he came and just read out a statement that, the board supports her. This was a consortium loan. There was no favoritism. There was no nepotism.
Mrs. Kochhar was a part of the credit committee which sanctioned these loan facilities to the Videocon group. The board does not see as a conflict of interest in any manner, since Videocon Group is not an investor in New Power Renewables. Hence, there was no need to recluse herself from this committee. As mentioned earlier, this committee had many independent directors and the committee was not chaired by her.
Very importantly, he made one statement.
The question has been asked as to, did she make the necessary disclosures to the company? I would like to state that she has been making all her disclosures in accordance with the regulatory guidelines under the Companies Act and the Banking Act.
So within days of Sharma making the statement, it emerges that ICICI Bank has appointed Cyril Amarchand Mangaldas to probe this issue about Chanda's quid pro quo. And they have given her a clean chit. See, nobody knew when he was appointed. Nobody knows what the report said. But the bank just issued a statement that there is no conflict of interest as per a report submitted by Cyril. Now, it didn't end there. The way the bank went on defending, now this is sometime in April, Cyril report. And sometime in June, that is, Chanda goes on leave. On 2nd of June, the bank issues a statement saying that she's not asked to go on leave. This was a pre-scheduled leave. They went on defending her.
Here's Kochhar in an earnings press conference from that time.
Well, I would say that one, the board has made its stand very clear, and the second is that ICICI Bank has always fully cooperated with all the regulatory and investigating agencies in any matter, and we would continue to cooperate.
In all this, Chanda Kochhar continued to enjoy all her perks and an inordinately high pay at ICICI. According to reports, she earned 7.85 crore rupees in 2016-17. According to one estimate, it was 133 times that of the median remuneration in the bank. Also, ICICI's annual reports of the years FY 2017 and 18 had no mention of the allegations, except a passing reference to issues of corporate governance in the chairman's letter to shareholders in FY 18. Now in 2018, a second whistleblower sent out another, more detailed letter on the quid pro quo scam. Meanwhile, other government agencies had begun to probe. In April 2018, the Serious Fraud Investigation Office got permission from the Ministry of Corporate Affairs to launch an investigation. The following month, the capital markets regulator SEBI sought an explanation from Chanda Kochhar on dealings with Videocon and New Power. Finally, in June 2018, the Audit Committee of ICICI launched an independent inquiry into the allegations against Chanda Kochhar. The inquiry was headed by former Supreme Court Judge B.N. Srikrishna. In January 2019, the probe found that Chanda Kochhar had indeed violated the bank's code of conduct. ICICI sacked her, denied her remuneration, and clawed back all bonuses and stock options given to her between April 2009 and March 2018. Chanda reacted that she was disappointed, hurt, and shocked by the decision, and that truth would prevail. But around the same time, the CBI filed an FIR. The accusations were criminal conspiracy, cheating, public servant taking illegal gratification, criminal misconduct by public servant, and abuse of official position by public servant. I asked my colleague Rashmi Rajput, who's been extensively reporting on the issue, to tell us what happened next.
The FIR was registered in January and the investigation started. The CBI went ahead, conducted a few raids. Based on the CBI's FIR, it was the Enforcement Directorate that registered a money laundering case. And that investigation actually kicked off, so to say, because they not only investigated the loans that were given to Videocon, but also they had mentioned about the loans that were given by ICICI to other companies when Chanda Kochhar was its MD and CEO. So they had also investigated that part. And in 2020, they had initially first what they did is they had under the PMLA, that is the Prevention of Money Laundering Act, they had attached her South Mumbai residence. Then in September of 2020, they had even arrested Deepak Kochhar. However, in November of 2020, the adjudicating authority under the PMLA ruled in favor of the Kochhars and the flat was then given back because the order was in the favor of the Kochhars and therefore the attachment that was done by the ED that wouldn't stand anymore and the flat then came in the custody of the Kochhars.
Meanwhile, the CBI did carry on with its investigation. The agency has alleged two instances of quid pro quo. One, the 64 crore rupees invested by Dhoot's company in New Power, even as Videocon group companies received loans almost at the same time from ICICI. Another, a South Mumbai apartment belonging to the Kochhars. Now, in the last 2 years, the CBI probe did not gather much steam. Why? The agency says the main reason was a delay in ICICI giving a prosecution sanction. What is that? It's an authorization to prosecute a public servant. Why is it contentious to this case?
Let me just dwell upon this prosecution sanction and why it is important. Now, she's been investigated as a public servant because there's a broader definition given by a Supreme Court judgment in which a banker is also being deemed as a public servant because they take care of, because there is a lot of public money invested in it. Therefore, she has the case that has been registered under a few sections of the Prevention of Corruption Act. Therefore, you have to have a prior sanction from the authority that is above the person who has been investigated. In this case, it has to be the board. Now, the sanction came in 2021 and post that, the CBI started investigating. They are saying that that sanction that they received was not appropriate. It wouldn't go as adequate as they want it to be. And therefore, they had been writing to the ICICI Bank saying that, please rework on your sanction for a fair investigation. However, the ICICI Bank sources tell us that the bank has written back to the agency saying that the sanction that they had given on 9th July 2021 should be seen as a sanction which is given to Chanda Kochhar, and that is it. They are not going to give any new sanction.
And why is ICICI giving an inadequate sanction letter? Clearly, because it doesn't want to be involved in the case. Go after the Dhoots and the Kochhars all you want, but we have nothing to do with this. That's what it seems to be saying. Well, now that may not be the case, because the 2019 FIR of the CBI did name other members of the committee that had approved the controversial loans. Who are they? The bank's CEO, Sandeep Bakshi, Executive Director K. Ramkumar, Sanjoy Chatterjee, former Executive Director at ICICI who now heads Goldman Sachs India, N.S. Kannan, another ICICI veteran and now the CEO of ICICI Prudential Life Insurance, Zareen Daruwala, who is now CEO of Standard Chartered Bank, Rajiv Savarwal, and then Chairman K.V. Kamath himself. So the CBI did mention some pretty big names in its FIR.
And that even drew a lot of flack, that time around the finance minister, the late Mr. Arun Jaitley, he himself went and he went on record and said that, the agency should not be into investigative adventurism. So that was a comment he made because the banking community went and complained to the finance minister saying that, the FIR mentions all the committee members. This is now how an FIR should be drawn by a premier agency like the CBI. So that particular bit was never investigated, and it looks like, even now the sanction that they have got would not help the agency to investigate the role of the committee members, so to say. So far, the CBI has never said that they are investigating the roles of the committee members. But what our sources say that during the questioning that happened post the arrest of Chanda Kochhar, she has always maintained that this was a collective decision.
Correct.
That she has never acted in individual capacity, and that the loans were sanctioned by the committee. She was just the head of the committee in two of the loans, but other 6 loans were granted and she was a member of the committee. So it was not an individual decision. So therefore, to say that she is responsible for the loans going bad would be incorrect. And this is what the CBI needs to investigate or prove in their case, that it was not a collective decision, it was her decision. Or even if suppose it was a collective decision, it was forced by her, or she was the reason for pushing that case. So why did she do so? And that is something for that they would require to question the committee members. And what we understand, our sources tell us that all the bankers, if they have to question any of the bankers, they have to do it under the Prevention of Corruption Act. And under the Prevention of Corruption Act, you have to get a prior sanction.
Okay, now 2 questions arise. ICICI was part of a consortium of banks that lent to Videocon. Will other banks be probed? Also, Videocon isn't the only company involved. According to whistleblower Gupta, between December 2010 and March 2012, New Power raised debt of 325 crore rupees from a Mauritius-based entity named First Land Holdings. Who owns First Land Holdings? As per the records in the Registrar of Companies, the entity was promoted by Nishant Kanodia, son-in-law of SR Group Chairman Ravi Ruya. ICICI has lent upwards of $500 million to the SR Group. Reports have cited Registrar of Companies data to say that the two happened around the same time, just like Videocon, ICICI, and Supreme Energy. Will CBI expand the scope of its investigation?
As far as the CBI is concerned, they are saying that that is not their case. Their case is only about the 1,800 odd crore loans which were sanctioned by ICICI to Videocon, and that is the case that they are investigating. The other names that you have mentioned, those were investigated by the ED. The ED had also called and questioned Mr. Kanodia during the course of the investigation. So these are 2 different investigations. So the first, what the agency will do is it will only concentrate on those loans. Now, once that is done, that is out of their ambit of investigation, then they can always say that, there are, during the course of the investigation, they have found more such loans that were given, and that requires to be investigated. And those are the loans given against, ex entities, and, they will name them and then they'll start investigating against them. Just to give an example, in case of Nirav Modi and Mehul Choksi, the initial amount that PNB had given was only of 2,000 crores. That was based on the LOUs they had. But then the scam increased, right? The amount increased. So the agency has registered a couple of more FIRs. So that depends upon the complaint as and when it comes.
Okay, now what will Chanda Kochhar's defense be? Rashmi told me her biggest defense will be the clean chit in the Enforcement Directorate case.
See, the ED has filed a prosecution complaint. Now, prosecution complaint is equivalent of a charge sheet which is filed in the CRPC. So that investigation is still underway, but they had filed their first prosecution complaint. See, you can file multiple charge sheets, as in when you find more leads or more evidence. So that particular investigation against them is still on. But what has happened in their favor is that the adjudicating authority on the PMLA, it has ruled in their favor, saying that the South Bombay flat, which was seen as proceeds of crime. Why is this important? Is because under PMLA, the property attachment is the most important procedure, because a money laundering case is all about proceeds of crime and attaching the proceeds of crime so that the accused does not enjoy the proceeds of crime. Their case was also based on the CBI's case. Now, remember, there was a Supreme Court judgment that came in recently in August. It says that if there is no predicate offense, the subsequent offense also falls. So, if suppose in the event in the future, suppose the CBI files this charge sheet and they get acquitted in the CBI's case. Now, this is acting as the predicate offense for the ED's case. That would mean that the ED's case is no more there because there is no predicate offense, therefore no subsequent offense. So this is very important. But in this case, what has happened is in the subsequent offense, that is in the PMLA case, the investigation and the PMLA case, the adjudicating authority has given an order in favor of the coaches saying that this cannot be deemed as proceeds of crime. And you remember in the CBI's case, they have mentioned two instances of alleged quid pro quo. One is the 64 crore loan which was given by Videocon to Deepak Kochhar's company. And the other is the flat, the South Mumbai residence. Now, South Mumbai residence, when there is an adjudicating authority of PMLA ruling in that favor, so the defense has already brought this to the notice of the court. During the stage of while seeking custody only, they're saying that when the enforcement directorate itself is saying that there is no merit in the CBI's FIR, how are you investigating? But the CBI has maintained the defense that, PMLA is not our act. We are investigating under IPC and PC, that is Prevention of Corruption Act. And in that, we have a case. So let the court decide that there is a case of corruption against Kochhar and the other people under the IPC or not. But we have nothing to do with the PMLA case. So this is going to be the biggest defense that she would have as the case proceeds. But so far, the ED's case is not over yet. They can always call her back if they want to, because there is always the scope of further investigation, which they have already told the court. The trial has not commenced and the ED has already challenged the adjudicating authority before the higher courts.
Now, none of that is going to be easy. For further clarity, I turned to Zulfiqar Memon, founder and managing partner, MZM Legal. So Zulfiqar told me the charges would include
criminal conspiracy, which is 120B, 420, which is cheating, and now 409, which I mentioned some time back, which is breach of trust by a banker or public servant, which attracts punishment of 10 years or up to life. So that has also been slapped now against them. In addition to these IPC offenses, there are certain sections of the very draconian, stringent PC Act, which have also been slapped on them. And Section 13 has been slapped on them, that there was an attempt to bribe a senior government official, a public servant, basically. So that's some in substance of the case against them.
If you were the Kochhar's lawyer, what are the three things that you would be worried about right now?
If I were to be in the defense team, the most important issue before me will be that of bail at this point of time. And I say this after having read the remand order in which the CBI have themselves asked the accused to be sent to judicial custody. I think the most vital strategy for the defense team will be to secure bail of the accused persons, because presently they are in the judicial custody. Also, we have to bear in mind that the lower courts are usually reluctant to grant bail, and hence more particularly that the CBI has now added section 409 IPC, which, for the benefit of your listeners, is breach of trust by a public servant and a banker, which is punishable up to life. So as a defense lawyer, my 100% focus will be on securing bail for the accused persons at the earliest, so that we can have enough time to prepare the case and have their involvement in the entire preparation as to contesting the trial will be concerned. Considering that the Enforcement Directorate has already filed their charge sheet and the CBI has yet to file the charge sheet.
But between 2016, when the news first broke out, to her arrest last week, what has changed in terms of regulations and self-regulation within banks? Are boards stronger, more accountable, and more independent? If such allegations of wrongdoing were to happen today, would the board similarly support a celebrity CEO as they did Chanda Kochhar? I asked Hemindra Hazari, an independent banking analyst, one of the strongest detractors of Kochhar in the issue, and a very strong voice for firmer banking regulations in India.
See, sadly, a lot of the conduct of the board depends on the conduct of the independent directors. After this incident and others like Yes Bank, the Reserve Bank of India has put in norms where certain senior officials like those of the internal audit or the chief risk officer of a bank, they have an independent reporting to the board, and in particularly subcommittees of the board, which are chaired by independent directors. However, I think a lot more needs to be done, because independent directors, as we have seen, very rarely behave independently. And their behavior normally is influenced by the CEO or the promoter. And they feel that they are beholden to the CEO and or the promoter. So instead of protecting the institutional interests, they really are there to protect the promoters. If a case were to come in today in the private sector, I fear that the board will first try to protect the CEO, as the ICICI Bank board did in 2018.
India's investigative agencies have a fairly poor record when it concerns bringing the bad boys of banking to book. There are just a handful of examples since the early 90s. M. Gopalakrishnan, chairman of Indian Bank, S.K. Jain, CEO of Syndicate Bank, IDBI chairman Yogesh Agarwal, and most recently, Yes Bank CEO Rana Kapoor. Some of them got bail, but there were many others that faced raids and probes but were never arrested.
So sadly, the track record of our investigative agencies, like the Central Bureau of Investigation and the Enforcement Directorate, is extremely poor, in that a minute percentage of the individuals that are arrested are actually convicted, which indicates that either these agencies are arresting innocent individuals, or their preparation for a case is very poor to convince the judicial system. In both cases, it shows that the premier investigative agencies of India have actually a very poor reputation when it comes to conviction. So there is a credibility issue for both agencies.
So, Mr. Hazari, I wanted to ask you if you would want to point our listeners towards other such cases. Are there more examples that you can cite of previous instances of wrongdoing, and also something that is ongoing that disturbs you or you've pointed it out in other banks? Would you like to share all that with our listeners, please?
I have seen in other banks as well, which had a disastrous track record in assessing credit in the private sector. And I pointed this out. But nothing had been done because the boards also kept defending the CEO. I had written extensively on the case of Yes Bank, and finally the Reserve Bank of India removed Rana Kapoor. But I had also written extensively on Shikhar Sharma's track record in Axis Bank, as well as Ramesh Sokti's last 4 years as the CEO in IndusInd Bank. In the case of Shikhar Sharma, the Reserve Bank of India finally did not give her her fourth term, which the board was so hastily giving, and therefore she had to leave. While in the case of Ramesh Sokti, he had reached the mandatory retirement age, and therefore he retired. Now, I have highlighted recently a couple of instances which I believe was poor corporate governance in Kotak Mahindra Bank, where the Securities and Exchange Board of India had indicted some of the senior officials of Kotak Mahindra Mutual Fund. And that included individuals like Mr. Nilesh Shah, like Lakshmi Iyer, and the indictments were very severe as well as the penalties. But nobody, apart from reporting on the story, went into this deeper. And one of the individuals indicted and penalized was Mr. Gaurang Shah, who was penalized, was a director on Kotak Mahindra Bank. And he subsequently stepped down. But his term had ended, so he had to be re-elected. But strangely, when your person stands for re-election, the bank has to give some background material of the individual. But when he was penalized by SEBI, the bank did not even put out a release to the exchanges that a director had been penalized by SEBI. So these are the instances that I have highlighted, which are, mind you, in my opinion, are very serious issues on corporate misgovernance.
Sangita is much more positive and hopeful.
A lot of things that RBI has done to their credit, and they've become very vigilant. RBI is no longer the way it was 10 years ago. They have also introduced the new framework on salaries, the compensation that is given to bank CEOs and whole-time directors, executive directors of the private banks. They've introduced a clawback of bonus, clawback of ESOP. They've asked banks that, the compensation should be staggered. It should not be bunched up immediately as a person has joined, or the entire structure should be such that no person can actually make a huge sum of money in one particular year. No person, as in no CEO, can make that kind of money. So basically, they have bought in all these things. They have made it mandatory that every senior position person goes on leave, and during that leave period, particularly if they are in a sensitive position, they have no access to paperwork or no access to office at all. They've also made it mandatory for banks to disclose if there's a huge parity between the assessment that RBI does on bad loans and the assessment which is done by the bank. That has to be disclosed to the exchange. So they said that whenever there's a gap of more than 15%, it should be disclosed to the exchange. But the bigger change that has come is that people are now very conscious that they will not be spared. Particularly, see, the background in which Chanda was asked to step down. A year ago, Yogesh Agarwal, IDBI chairman, was put behind bars regarding Kingfisher. Within 2 months of Yogesh Agarwal going behind bars, Archana Bhargava, who was the CEO of United Bank of India, former CEO of United Bank of India back then, there was an FIR against her for misappropriation of funds. Then Usha Anant Krishnan, who was CEO of Allahabad Bank, and she was named in by CBI for Nirav Modi case. So there was this perception that, if anybody goes behind bars or if anybody is questioned, it is PSU banks. We private banks will not be questioned. Now that has changed. The sense I get is that, or at least I'm very hopeful that it will prevent such instances. Because people are very conscious that it can't go on forever. They'll be caught. And if they're caught, their career is finished.
Chanda Kochhar's story will be remembered for many years, within banking circles and outside. For an onlooker like me, it feels like the meatiest part of a Netflix thriller, where revelations have started to come, things are unraveling, but there's many episodes, maybe even a season left. The CBI is confident of its case, Rashmi tells me. What makes it so confident? What will be the Kochhar's defense? Will more skeletons stumble out of ICICI's closet? More executives? More banks? More companies? For people in the industry, the story, and especially the arrest, comes as a shocker. For many, it would come as a lesson and a warning. In one of the first such instances of corruption and indictment, Gopalakrishnan of Indian Bank was arrested only when he was enjoying retirement. After a plush career wherein he remained untouched and got 7 extensions as CMD. From there, we've come to a place where celebrity CEOs are caught mid-career. There is, of course, still a long way to go. There are loopholes and many of the wrongdoers slip away. Some flaws, like weak boards that kowtow to powerful senior management personnel, remain. But the overall structure of rules and regulations are stronger. The RBI is more vigilant. And there's a government insistent on weeding out corruption, if only to score points against the previous one. So, as Sangita told me, it's impossible to stop such instances of corruption. But the hope is that many potential wrongdoers will stop themselves. You were listening to this episode on the Morning Brief. We thank all our guests, especially Sangita, for being a constant guide in this one. This episode was produced by Vinay Joshi and sound designed by Indranil Bhattacharjee. Executive producers Arijit Burman and Anupriya Bahadur. Do listen to us every Tuesday, Thursday and Friday. We hope to tell you many more compelling and interesting stories this year. From the TMB team, here's wishing you a great 2023. This is Anirban Chowdhury signing off. Thank you. All clips used in this episode belong to their respective owners. Credits are in the description.